Mark Cuban.
Mark Cuban. Other day, he was on Fox spewing the garbage of, it's a privilege to pay the taxes to support the system that we have in the United States, and I about lost it.
Well, you know, that's why guys like Mark Cuban will probably never support what we do, because our supporters come from all walks of life, right? And the people that are the most enthusiastic about Texas independence are the ones they're able to get by, but they're not able to get ahead because of what this system has done to them. And we have the power in our hands to change that. What we need is we need a debate and we need a vote on Texas independence. Yes, sir.
Wouldn't we have to have our own monetary system?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that.
National debt?
Okay, okay. Social Security first. Federal benefits payments that are owed and due to individuals are still contractually obligated by the federal government, but again, they can repeal those at any time by law. But even the Social Security Administration itself says that you can live outside the United States and collect Social Security benefit payments. The benefit payments from the federal government amount to a total of about $74 billion a year. So even if the federal government abrogated their responsibility and said, hey, we're going to throw you out on the street, we don't care if you starve to death or not, the people of Texas, as it stands right now, could absolutely pick up that slack and take care of that burden. And look, they've broken promises before, right? I had a gentleman tell me one time, if you ever believe that the federal government upholds promises, talk to an Indian, right? So we know they break promises. And look, whether we're in or out of the union, be prepared. They're getting ready to break the promise that they have made on the issues of Social Security and those and veterans benefits. I mean, we could get into that, but we actually have a document on our website where we did a study called Can Texas Make It, where we break down all of those figures and the issue of Social Security is in there. Okay, your question was national debt. I got an answer to that question, strangely enough, after 20 years, I've never heard an answer. All the answers I gave were okay. This guy just slam dunked me on the court. Here's his thing, and I think it should probably be our attitude toward a lot of things. We will absolutely pay our share of the national debt. While we were part of the union, it was accumulated and we will pay it. Now, how that's calculated, that's a different story. However, our caveat is we will pay it at the same rate that they repaid their portions of the national debt. Look, that guy blew me out of the box. I love it. And your other question was national debt, and there was one other. Currency. Okay, so currency is an issue. One of the things that you have to contend with is that we do not have to immediately come up with our own currency. That's not necessary. You can adopt a currency from another country. Other countries do it all the time with the US dollar. Some countries that are not inside the Eurozone actually have the Euro as an official currency. However, this is what I will tell you, is that as an organization, it's one of the areas that we have made the most significant progress toward independence. Back in 2010, we saw legislation that would essentially establish a gold depository in Texas. From that time, we championed that legislation. We blew up the switchboards at the legislature every session. And finally, State Rep Giovanni Capriglione, he championed that thing, he got it passed. Now, what's interesting about it is the headline that everybody said is Texas gets its own Fort Knox, right? They're repatriating Texas gold, you'll be able to have a depository, but what most people missed in that legislation was that it specifically sets up a system of exchange denominated in the precious metals inside that depository. So much like Texas has a proto-military through the Texas Military Department and the Texas Military Forces, Texas has the makings of its own currency. It's just a little bit longer, and we'll be there. But it won't take long to get that done at all. Yes, sir.
So what, if we do become independent, what is the procedure for forming government? You know, let's say we'll have a constitutional convention to rewrite the Constitution, and another thing is, for instance, Vermont's the other state that is seeking the independence.
Right.
And they're much smaller, though I would say they're more centralized. But would you envision Texas as a state becoming a federal state and, you know, delegating a lot of the powers to local? Of course, obviously education and, you know, healthcare probably and some of the other powers would be more local. But would it be more of a federal system where Texas would be divided into individual, you know, different administrative districts, and where in Austin or wherever the capital would be at, having all the control, be more towards the people, and local control. on
Okay,
those issues.
so let me take, okay, let me take them in order. The first question, because I got sort of sidetracked from my first question dealt with
Well, I mean, first,
the Constitutional Convention.
The Constitution.
Okay, just something to bear in mind is that whatever is law now continues to be law until it's no longer law. Okay, so what that essentially means is that the day after the independence vote, nothing changes, right? Trash is going to still get picked up. If you call 911, they'll show up 5 minutes after you shoot the intruder. You know, things like that will be done, right? So that's the thing, and whatever's in effect is still law. So what that means is, how do we then handle the transition from a state government over to a national government? That can happen in one of two ways. Number one is either a full-blown constitutional convention, which if anyone went to the Republican State Convention, you can understand why that might be a little problematic. But the other is similar to what happened in the 1960s when they passed what's called the Deadwood Amendment, where rather than doing a full-blown constitutional rewrite, they were trying to go through and clear out redundant language or outdated language, and there are things that deal with Spanish land grants and a lot of different things like that. They actually got all of those changes and compiled them into one constitutional amendment, repealing specific provisions in mass, and then the people went and voted on it. So that is, from the standpoint of where I'm at now, what I would advocate the changes be, which would be to institute constitutionally the functions that are missing from the state of Texas to being a full-blown self-governing independent republic, and then putting those questions to the voters. To your second question, Vermont is something that is, strangely enough, near and dear to my heart. Are you familiar with Dr. Thomas Naylor?
I've read a little bit about it, but I'm not.
Dr. Naylor and I were very close friends until he passed a few years ago. I would consider Dr. Naylor probably one of my mentors. He wrote a phenomenal book on the Second Vermont Republic called, strangely enough, Secession. And people always thought it was odd that a professor emeritus of economics from Duke University would be leading the charge for the Green Mountain State to exit the Union. But what is interesting about it is they are definitely more centralized. He and I have had this conversation, strangely enough, before about the similarities and the differences here. Texas, throughout its history, has never been a federated state, which is, I think, is kind of odd that we have sort of a bicameral legislature. We've never been a federal state. Right now, these administrative districts that you're talking about, counties are actually, by law, considered to be administrative subdivisions of the state. So, you know, we're sort of there, but Texas has never been. We've been what is essentially a unitary nation state. So, yes, sir.
What would happen if we got federal penitentiaries in the state of Texas? What would happen to those in the state and the people that work in them?
Well, if I don't get what I want, I will probably be in one. Sure. I'm sure that I've violated some law here tonight. But what will happen to them? You know, it's the same thing. We actually talked about this before we started about the military bases. You know, some of those are owned, some of them are leased facilities. But the fact of the matter is, that's all part of the children, property, and assets discussion that transpires. But you see, there is this sort of underlying thought that people have sometimes that the Texas leaving the Union has got to end in some sort of negative way, right? There are amicable divorces. I mean, it does happen. And we, strangely enough, we saw it with the dissolution of all things of the Soviet Union, where they had vigorous negotiations over the division of the Black Sea Fleet, right? The naval fleet that is on the Black Sea. So you see these things happen all the time. There can be, and at the end of the day, what's going to drive these things, particularly with things like federal prisons in the military, is just because we are no longer in economic or political union does not mean that our common interests evaporate. Our security concerns, probably their security concerns. Their national defense concerns, still our national defense concerns. Their ability to imprison, you know, hardcore criminals, you know, maybe we'll operate them on a contract basis to them. I mean, those are things that can be discussed and that there are solutions out there for, and they're easily attainable. And honestly, those are the most probable outcomes.
I've got a friend of mine, her husband works at a federal penitentiary, and that's one of her things about Texas not seceding is her husband would be probably messed over because he's a federal employee.
Well, where else are we going to jail failed federal bureaucrats.
Shoot.
I mean, they still got trouble, right? Those of you listening at home, that is a joke. Not really. Anyway, does anybody have any more questions?
Did
Because
Marilyn,
I
do you
am
have a
out of
question?
coffee.
Yeah, how do you spell Brexit?
B-R-E-X-I-T. B-R-E-X-I-T, Brexit. You'll see it. Brexit, Frexit, Grexit. I don't know what they're gonna do with Portugal.
Is this the same thing you're talking about, the bricks that they're talking about?
No, Brexit, that's a different thing. BRICS is a whole other discussion.
LaRouche, the LaRouche guy?
Yeah, well, no, that's a different topic that I'm not in.
Yeah.
But this idea of Brexit, understand if you look it up, if you do any searches for it, what you're going to find is a mountain of information. You know, most people, the Scottish referendum snuck up on them. They're like, what do you mean Scotland's voting next week to leave? It's like, well, wait a minute. They've had a formal 2-year debate and about 800 years worth of work to get there. This idea of Brexit has been taking place since 1973, and I'm glad to see, and I've got friends over there in the UK Independence Party. Every day, I'm just overjoyed that they're getting this opportunity, and I look forward to the day when we get ours. So I want to thank you guys so much. I appreciate you attending. I want to turn it back over to you.
Thanks for coming. That's it. Appreciate you coming, Daniel.
Jeff,
Can't follow that.
That is the worst conclusion ever.